Welcome back to another installment of this series on recalls. I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler, and I'm here with Dr. Morrine Omolo. Morrine, welcome back.
Pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure, believe me, is mine. I'm so honored to be able to spend some more time with you here. Last time we were in person spending time together, I mentioned this in the last episode, we went to the ball game in Chicago, and, we were watching the game, but we have to remind ourselves that behind the scenes, this is a team that practices. They spend all their time before the season starts and training and years of training and in their position, maybe different positions, and their coaches and the drills they run and the scenarios and all the different work that goes into being ready for the game. I have to make the obvious connection and say that that same kind of mentality has to go into a food company being able to be recall ready, being prepared for the event where there's maybe a recall.
Indeed. And to be fair, we can never really be fully prepared for recall, just like you cannot predict how a game is going to play out. However, that is not an excuse to just relax and not practice. You don't just show up to any game, track and field and whatnot. You don't just show up and say, I'm good at this. Every time I've done it in the past, I've been good. I'll be okay. There's a reason why athletes take a lot of time and a lot of pleasure in practicing and making sure that they know their stuff. It's the same reason musicians practice their instruments every day so that they stay sharp. There's two parts to that, right? There's the obvious reality of ironing out the kinks in your plan, but there's also the keeping it at the top of everyone's mind every day that while our business is making food that everybody wants to eat and we want to, blend our style and our ethics and everything that identifies a company, they want to share that with the consumer. That's what they're going after. The reality is sometimes things go wrong, and not necessarily because somebody did something wrong. It could be a failure in the system itself. So how do we get people to start thinking about situations where something could go wrong? Those basic failure mode analysis. How could this go wrong? And if it did, what would we do? We do that in our lives too. We practice for, I got to go to work 10 minutes early just in case there's traffic. You could drive to work for 20 years and never be stuck in traffic, depending on where you live. But that's not a reason to not plan ahead and prepare for that. So, to my point, practicing allows you to think of scenarios and possibilities of things that could go wrong. It allows you to see where your response to those issues might be wanting. It might show you gaps where you had not even thought about. Like if you rely on water from the city and the city has to shut down water for a day, what do you do if everybody showed to work? Do you tell everybody go home until we let you know, or do you have somewhere to pivot? If you get a phone call from a consumer saying, I think I'm sick because I ate your product, what do you do? Do you fumble around and make up some nonsense, or do you pull out the script and walk them through very clear steps of what they should do? You cannot make that up on the fly. It has to be something that you plan, practice, and help your people learn and practice.
I recently encountered a scenario where a friend of mine, and yes, I have more than one, a friend of mine was involved in a recall, and they were shocked in terms of the online platform that sold their product. They weren't able to communicate and get the same, reliance on how numbers would be used. And it made me really scratch my head because if they had been doing practice recalls, they should have figured that out, and in baseball and in many sports, you've got people who they look at the visiting team, they look at the other team, the other competitors, the other players in terms of what are their percentages, what are their stats, what are their, where are their strengths, where are their weak points. And you'd have to think that a company would want to look at all of their, whether it's their suppliers, their distribution team, their security, their warehousing, their sales, and make sure that everyone is aware of all the differences in terms of likelihood and severity and feasibility and impact, and have a good sense of that information to truly understand all of not only the protocols but all of the players.
Yes, indeed. And the irony of the farm to fork cliche is that it's quite literal, right? Your final product that ends up on the shelf is a work of art from hundreds of hands over a period of time. And the example I like to give, and pardon my example here, it's a very good one though, is the hamburger example. When you go to McDonald's or your favorite fast food restaurant and you say, give me a burger with this, and that, it comes out and it's one nice meal that you can bite and in 5 minutes you're done. But if you were to break it down into what goes into making your favorite Mac this or Mac that, it's amazing the sources of the individual proteins and vegetables and spices, and then you add human complexity and the system complexity. It's impossible to think about all the potential failures if you're not actually thinking and planning and testing those things out. You cannot do it as a mind activity. It has to be played out.
Yeah, that kind of bigger systems thinking, it kind of lends itself to the idea that being recall ready would require you to be systematically approaching those efforts to be as prepared as you can be. You don't just have one team or one individual that works on being recall ready. You have to have the entire team and the entire system on board with what's going to play out if this happens. Let's run a mock drill or, a mock recall, or let's practice this. Let's run a scenario and let's see how everyone and all of our equipment and all of our systems will react to see, what are our gaps? What are the pain or the pressure points when something happens? Because I would rather find out before than when you're in the middle of a recall.
Imagine the surprise. The simple question I always ask is, who's on your recall team? Do you have a recall team first? And then who's on your recall team? And oftentimes you'll find that recall teams are built of people on leadership. It's the same table, it's the table, the people who are always at the table. And thinking more broadly, when you have a recall, you want information. You want information at its source. You want the people who are frontline center, feeling, hearing, touching. You want people who are in the front line to be on your recall team. It doesn't mean that you need all your operators, but you need somebody who's on the floor regularly enough to be able to reach back into those relationships and ask those authentic, candid questions. Because you don't want, if the VP of whatever shows up and asks a front operator question, chances are they're not going to get the answer that needs to be told. They're going to get the answer that the operator feels the VP needs to hear. So yes, the recall team needs to exist and you need to have a plan, but who's at the table matters just as much as the table itself.
Yeah. I, again, talking to folks, I encountered a scenario where someone was sharing how they did a quick look at who their recall team was made up of, and nearly a third of those people no longer worked at the company. They hadn't
Mm.
updated it in so long, and it's kind of fun because we've been making the analogy with a baseball game, and when you go to a baseball game, they're very clear who's in what position and who's up next and who's where and stuff like that. And yet, imagine being a company where you're just kind of making the assumption that A, people know who's on your recall team, but B, those people are actually there still working for the company. Not, oh, we got to do this now. Oh, we don't have anyone in this position. We have to figure out what to do. That just delays, um, the response.
And imagine if you have a team where, first of all, half the people are not even there anymore, to your point. But if you have team players who don't know what their role is on the team, so you might have a recall team that's made up because it's a requirement for this and that. You have a food safety plan, therefore you must have a food safety team, you must have a recall team, you must have a food defense team. Fine. Do those individuals know that they're on those teams, or do they get surprised when you call them, like, what is a recall team? How did I get put on the recall team? And when they're on the team, do they know what their specific deliverable is in the event of a recall? Have they practiced enough so that it's intuitive to them? When I hear this, I do that. right? So that's the part where practice is important. You don't want your recall team or half of them to be surprised. You also don't want the recall team to be isolated from the food safety and the risk management team. In many ways, there should be enough overlap, maybe not of the people directly, but of communication, so that the person who's managing the recall team knows when this happens, I need to call so and so, this and this and that, and I need to trigger these 5 things. It needs to be almost prescripted for them. And it should be like when your phone rings, you know to answer it.
Well, and I think it's important before we leave this episode or this installment to point out that if it's not documented, do you really
it
have that team set up, and do they really know what their specific jobs are to be doing, to be taking in the event of a mock recall or a real recall?
Good point.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to come back for looking at your thoughts about being in the middle of a recall.